First of all, a huge thank you to Lord Covier for stepping in last minute. It's going to be super exciting to have one from the government and one from the industry to talk about AI with us today. To start with, Matt, he's leading advancements in AI, green tech, and computing resources. His aim is to democratize access to computing resources for social impact. Thank you for joining us, Matt. And Lord Covier, would you like to give us a quick introduction about yourself?
Yes, hi, good afternoon everyone, and thank you Dumpling. I want to thank James and also Elena for this last minute invitation to attend and speak. Wow. But firstly, just one point. I'm not from the government and I'm not here to help because I'm a new peer. So you've heard from my colleagues, Lord Holmes and Viscount Camrose earlier, fantastic, eminent peers. I'm a humble new peer, relatively new to the House of Lords. I'm kind of one of you guys. I'm the person from industry. I spent 25 years in industry. I started my career working in IT for that company, Carphone Warehouse, if anyone remembers them, and then have done a variety of different things in infrastructure delivery, technology. I worked for the mayor, Boris Johnson, and ran the transport brief from 2008. I set up the digital office for London in 2010. And really, that's where I think the story becomes really interesting because we started to see a change, not just in London, but across the world, in terms of startups and what was happening with data and what was happening with creativity and unleashing of innovation. And it was exciting. And the last 15 years has seen an immense change in the technology landscape, both macro and startups and scale-ups and everything in between. Along that journey, I've managed to continue to work in industry and now find myself, rather strangely for me, in the House of Lords, trying to do what I think a number of speakers have touched on today, which is how do we educate and inform so that we get the best outcomes when we're trying to do the R word, which is regulate and legislate, but without barriers, without friction, so that it is first and foremost about enabling innovation, good investment, and good outcomes for people. So a small introduction, but that's the ambition. I'll let you know in about 10 or 20 years' time whether I've managed to achieve it or not, Dumpling.
Since you mentioned it, I'm going to put you on the spot. How do you think today's AI could have helped Boris Johnson? In what way?
Talk about putting someone on the spot. Well, look, it's not about Boris. It's about those jobs. So what we're talking about is, you're probably asking, let me reframe it, how can politicians be helped by AI? Which is quite an interesting conversation because we've already had that debate at times in the chamber, in the Lords, about are we using AI to help with our speeches? You know, should we declare that? It's almost like the thing with students in terms of what they're doing around their essays and assessment on are they using artificial intelligence to help them. I think, look, the bottom line here is there's going to be a complementary way of working with this powerful technology as we go forward. And we're all finding our way. I still believe we're very much in the foothills of how do we utilize AI. And everyone keeps saying, I can keep saying AI, but actually it's the outcomes, whether it's in education, whether it's in politics, whether it's in health tech, it's the outcomes that we're really trying to see. And we'll probably come to something what Matt will talk about, because those outcomes will be determined by two major things. One will be, it's been touched on earlier as well, the quality of the data that we can access. And the other side is the power of compute that we can utilize to actually get those large language models and actually really extract the kind of insights that will then enable services to develop and innovate. Probably doesn't answer your question, but I think that's the way it'll go for politicians as well.
That's a great start. So speaking of compute, Matt, would you like to enlighten us? What should we as normal people who are not computing resources experts know about the advancements, the exciting things that are happening? And how are these advancements helping with social impact, for example?
Well, firstly, AI doesn't work without compute, obviously. So that's where we're seeing huge growth, and it's partly because of the chips, you know, from typically NVIDIA, when you're doing the training's obviously building the brain. But then after, when you're doing inference, you've got all these other providers that are now building more and more efficient computing, which means that we can build and we can train much better models, more intelligent models, and give more people access to that information as well. So that's what we're seeing from a growth perspective, from the amount of power in the industry. We are looking at somewhere between 2 to 3 times the world's power consumption for compute and AI now by the end of this decade, just to keep up with this demand. And if you think where we've gone from, we mentioned the LLM, if you think we've gone from LLMs in the last few years, we've increased tenfold in their intelligence, essentially. If you look at it from a parameter perspective, which is how many bits of information we use to build that model, then that's the increase that we're doing. And it means over the next few years, we're going to be doing exactly the same. And the only way to do that is to keep building more computing, is actually to keep consuming more electricity, but we've got to do it sustainably. So, as kudos, everything that we do runs in renewable energy locations. It has to do, because just the environment will not be able to cope with the amount of data centers that we're building and the amount of power that we're going to have to consume over the next few years. We've already got a challenge because of the power grids, because electric vehicles are now starting to take a drain. And you're moving to how we distribute energy, or how we distribute information. And it takes around 10 times the amount of power to produce an answer in an LLM than it does if you do it on Google. So we've got this huge increase. And on the other side, everything is being integrated into AI. On your phones, it's on Salesforce and your emails and whatever you use. Everything's now moving over to it. And I think you'll see probably most things in our daily lives over the next 2-3 years are now going to become part of AI. So it's trying to keep up with that demand. And we've got huge amounts of renewable energy being built into the grids as well. And especially in the UK, they're now loosening the rules so that it's quicker and easier for people to build wind farms and other power generation, sustainable power generation. And then we also work with data center providers where we're actually capturing the heat. So these servers produce a lot more heat and use a lot more energy than traditional servers, which means you can get higher heat to come out of them, and higher heat means you can make more use of that heat. So we've got a provider we work with in Sweden, for example. They grow 700,000 cucumbers a year just from the heat from the AI. So you've got AI-powered cucumbers coming out now. So it's we can really do more, because the way we're consuming the compute actually means that we can do better things with that energy.
You mentioned AI is so much integrated into our daily and working lives now, but looking into the future, can you tell us what might be some of the surprising integrations into our daily lives that AI can bring us?
I would say, I think what's going to become a surprise is that we are all going to have our own PAs, basically. We're all going to have our own taxi drivers. I think it's, without us even noticing, all of our simple tasks that you'd usually have to have paid someone to do, or you wouldn't be able to afford to pay to someone to do, are just going to happen. So agents are essentially a human being, an AI version of a human being. And as they become more general access, because everything's becoming open source, it means it can become cheaper and everyone can access it. It means all of your day-to-day tasks are just going to be not all, the simpler tasks in the background to start with, at least. Booking things, going on holiday. But even from a team perspective, they're looking at about 30% of jobs to be displaced by the end of the decade. But they can be replaced with other roles. But that's because these roles are going to be automated. So I think what we're just going to not notice, but what's going to happen, is just that we're going to get more time. And we're going to be more useful in our time. We're not going to be doing those, what we will in the future consider menial tasks, will be done by other people. So I think that's probably one of the biggest changes that are going to happen. But we're sort of, the way internet creeped into our lives and we didn't really notice it, it just becomes part of it. I think that it'll be the same here.
Yeah, it's part of our lives. Lord Cuvier, we had a quick but interesting discussion about regulation. In Web3, a lot of emotional, interesting discussions about Web3 crypto regulations in different jurisdictions. And now, from a very philosophical level, what's your view on regulating AI?
Well, I got the hard question. Could I just answer the one about, what's the future going to look like for us? Because I completely agree with Matt. Matt, it'll solve that eternal problem that probably most of us have, and it's very almost first world. Multiple calendars. You were talking about how we all got to juggle these things. But I think just on the future, I'm a big fan of sci-fi. Won't surprise anyone who knows me. And you look at films from the past. And I mean the real part. I look at sort of 2001: A Space Odyssey with HAL and the computer that went mad and various other things, and the Star Trek films. And we kind of project sci-fi into the future. And there's a Minority Report, which you look at the correlation between the development of autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and technology around what we use. And we'll have those vehicles probably driving around. And the way personal mobility, I think, will change. We kind of see it now where, if you want to go from somewhere from A to B, you can use an app and it might tell you how to do it. But it's not quite frictionless yet. I think when we think about the future, it's really how do we get to a frictionless form of service, whatever we're talking about. Whether it's the health service, whether it's mobility, whether it's finance and banking, it's that friction that will start to be taken out and become much a smoother experience. But I also think, Matt, you said time will come back to us. I was only commenting to my wife the other day, it seems with all this technology, I've got less and less time because you tend to be doing more and more because you have the time to do it. So what I really am glad to see is the focus on actually well-being. So if we can marry this focus on well-being, time, and frictionless, I think that's something that might, a bit utopian, a bit sci-fi, but maybe we'll get there. So coming back to your point about regulation, philosophically, I heard someone, I forget the name of the speaker, so forgive me, but I believe she was a lawyer who said, well, if you get good regulation, you get more innovation. I've never heard someone in industry say that. Has anyone from industry ever thought if you get more regulation, you get more innovation? So philosophically, I feel, you have to trust markets. You have to trust innovators. You have to trust businesses. You have to look at self-regulation. In fact, regulation should step in generally when there's potentially a failure or there's a real level of risk. And I think it's been said before, in fact, probably by the now new leader of the Conservative Party, that we've moved into a very risk-orientated society. We try to engineer out risk at every point, and that leads us to, increasingly amount of state intervention, more rules, more guidance, more regulation. So philosophically, I think there will be a debate, or there should be a debate, about why are we regulating? What are we really trying to achieve? And yes, look at the risk models involved. And yes, look at where there could be market failure. But leave plenty of scope for innovation, investment, and growth. Because if we really want society to work, and obviously philosophically, full disclosure, I'm a conservative. I bet you wouldn't have guessed that by what I'm saying. But we have to look at, if we overregulate, what's the consequence? And I think the AI Act in the EU has demonstrated in one way, that's still early stages about where it's coming in, but we're already hearing noises from the EU itself that it may have stifled innovation. It may be stifling investment into the ecosystem in the EU. And I'm not saying this because I'm saying it. I heard one of the authors of the AI Act speak at CogX a couple of weeks ago, say it himself. He's a member of the European Parliament. So we really need to think hard when we ask for regulation, because bureaucracy, we want to continue to create regulation. In fact, one of the things that I've learned being in Parliament now is, what's the point of Parliament if it's not creating more laws? Well, I don't think we need to be there just to create more laws because we should create more laws. I think we really need to think about why we're creating them.
Thank you. That's someone who's from the industry would be able to say that, because you have the understanding of how it works. Now, science fiction. One of my favorite recent science fictions is Aliens Prometheus, because David, the AI created by humans, he grew so much self-awareness, human emotions like ego and self-respect, that he believed he is better than his creators. Humans are mortal and vulnerable, and he decided to make humans his experimental objects to create aliens. And that struck me really deep. Just because you are able to create something probably doesn't mean you're able to continuously outsmart or control it. Talking about the feared concept earlier, is that a concern of yours, Matt and Lord Cuvier? Are you worried that AI would outsmart us or even grow intelligence and human-like emotions?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly we are going to get there. And there's kind of 3 stages. There's the stage that we're going through at the moment. There's then AGI, it's called, which is artificial general intelligence, where it's considered to be the equivalent of your, above average, I guess, human, that would be able to pretty much pick up any task. And we are there from an intelligence perspective, but we're not there from a reasoning perspective at the moment. So the reasoning is flawed. It's based on large language models, which is trying to predict the next word, essentially. And that's built from just huge amounts of online data, everything that we can get, and also now private data, because people like OpenAI are paying to get access to different types of reports that are out there, which aren't publicly available, so it has additional knowledge. But so we are definitely there from a knowledge perspective, because you talk to an AI, it's going to know way more than you do about pretty much any subject. The latest version, which OpenAI brought out, is meant to be the equivalent of a PhD student, but hasn't got the quite right reasoning, and also has hallucinations, which is where it makes mistakes. And it thinks it's right, and it talks to you really confidently, thinking it's right, and it's just made up a number or something. But there are projects, ASI are working on a project where they are getting rid of the hallucinations. And there's projects at the moment, one called Strawberry, if you've heard of it, which is kind of a nickname for one of OpenAI's projects. And that's where they change the way reasoning works. At the moment, it will just base it on knowledge it's been given in the past. The newer versions that they're working on is based on knowledge it learns while it's going along, so you don't have to train it each time. And then it makes up its own decisions like a human does, and thinks for its own thoughts. So we're kind of there in like early stages of that. So I'd say we're probably, and it depends which reports you read, but somewhere between 25, 26, a lot of people are saying we're going to do AGI at least. And that's when things like agents are really important. So that an agent is basically a person that you can assign in a business or a role or a task, and it will just go along and do it like a human would. The next one after that is ASI, which is artificial superintelligence, and that is based on essentially having the greater reasoning than the entire of humanity put together. But what's starting to happen is AI is now training AI, and that exponentially increases the amount of, or the speed that it learns. It needs new technologies, and that's being worked across different areas. But yeah, depending on what you read there as well, there's a lot of them expect that we're going to have this by the end of the decade. So that will be obviously huge change to everything that we do from a society perspective then.
Yeah, I've got to admit, I'm no expert on this at all, but I did hear a fantastic software developer from Google discussing how large language models are talking to each other and learning from each other. And suddenly you start thinking, okay, yes, where is the element of control here? But also how synthetic data, the development of data, because we'll have utilized all the data, I think by 2030 in terms of what we've created. So there will be creating synthetic data. And all these concepts, can give rise to fear. But actually, that's not where my concern comes in, because it's a bit further down the line. It's always computer says no, right? Because, and we heard my great colleague, Viscount Camaros, talking about, one of the big opportunities currently will be around the public sector, because the amount of data that's available and the utilization that AI can bring and improvement in services. But it's the rules that bureaucracy sets around these things that actually can create the problems. The software, the systems, the AI is a consequence of how we program these things and how we decide certain rules. And if we don't get that right, the fundamentals, then we can instill problems in what we're doing. So I think it's really about the human side of it as much as the technology side, that we make sure that the authors, the people who are actually doing the programming, we get the right kind of mixture of minds, it's all, diversity and everything else, to ensure that that building block, those building blocks, the starting point of what we're trying to do, is best placed to get the right outcomes at the end.
AI is obviously doing a lot of advancements and helping us in different areas. One of the things I've been thinking about, in Web3, we have a concept calling connecting the connected. Many people in rural areas or underdeveloped places, they don't have access to internet, let alone banking and DeFi. Now, when we think about AI, would part of the world have super advanced access to AI and enjoy the benefits, while the other part of the world are even more left behind because they wouldn't even have access to internet?
Still around a third of the world hasn't got access to internet even now, which is kind of crazy to think about when we're used to it in our daily lives. So one of the things that it brings is internet gave us the access to education and to learn and access information. But you still need internet. But with a large language model, and there's more and more intelligent language models being shrunk down to smaller amounts of data, that can fit on a mobile phone or a home PC. That means that actually you don't need to give it access to the internet to have access to a lot of the internet information that's on the internet. If you talk to an LLM, it doesn't need access to the internet to pretty much know most of general knowledge on the internet. So it means that, let's say it's a school in Africa that doesn't have access to the internet. As long as you can get that LLM onto a PC there, it means that you can still ask it everything. You can have it like your teacher, you can have it access to most of the, important educational information that you would want. So I think that's where it's going to probably change things a lot. As long as someone's got access to a computer, they can now have access to knowledge, whereas previously you needed to have access to the internet. So I think that's going to be a really big change. And not only that, even if you can't have access to a teacher, it can teach you. Especially with the latest ones like Llama 3.2 that have come out, it's got access to vision. So it can see what you're doing. It can see your workings that you're writing down on paper. It can be your teacher. Wherever you are in the world, if you've got access to internet, great, you can talk to an LLM. If you don't, you can still talk to a local machine. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest changes.
Yeah, look, I'd agree. I think the biggest challenge around the first generation of the internet was connectivity. Does everyone remember dial-up? We've moved on, but it wasn't the internet. It was the connectivity that sort of throttled people and sort of held things back. And to a certain part, you can still be in parts of London and struggle to get 3G. So we're still going around connectivity. But I talk about, and I have for quite a while, so still relatively concept works, is personal digital ecosystem. Every one of us over the last sort of 20 years has created this ecosystem of devices. So it used to be a computer, right? It's actually now your smartphone, which is your device, and you buy this thing. And then there's the connectivity part. We're all paying for broadband and Wi-Fi and everything else. And then it's the platforms that we decide to use, whatever social media platforms of your choice or however you're connecting. So you put these three things together, and that's your personal ecosystem that you've created, that then everyone else jumps onto to contact you, to sell you things, to challenge you and everything else, whilst you're still trying to do things, maybe work, educate. And the question is, how much can we scale those ecosystems? How quickly, how agile do they become? How those devices, that connectivity, those platforms move at pace, at scale, especially in the developing world? And the example that I'd give is sort of India, for example, where it's said the next decade will be India's decade, especially in the technology sense. It absolutely will be, because it has a population of circa 1.4 billion people that have access and connectivity and now devices. There's something like 900 million smartphones in India. That market, if you can get a product out there, if you can get a platform out there, if you can access a percentage, it's absolutely huge. So that's the kind of access and development that we're going to see of personal ecosystems evolve. And the question will be, how do people feel that they're in control? Because you establish this, and then everyone's coming into this towards you. Where is your element of control on this? And I think that's the next stage where people will be deciding, okay, and I think that's where Web3 really plays a part, linking back to your topic here, because people will want to feel that it isn't just a centralized approach that's coming to them and they're just being, used as almost commodity in that. They have a vested stake, they have control, and they can actually have more conscious decision-making in that environment.
I will be very curious personally about how some Web3 concepts like self-sovereign identity, taking control over your data, would overlap with use of AI and personal AI ecosystems. Matt and Lord Cuvier, what advice would you give to people who are here today to better prepare ourselves for the upcoming AGI and ASI?
I think one thing we've learned from technology is you can't fight it. It's coming. So prepare for it and engage and make the most of it, I think. So the best way is to work out, from your work perspective, from your home perspective, where do you think it's going to affect you? And if you're in a role where your role's at risk, over the next few years as that changes, it's best to skill up into other roles and work out, where it isn't going to be affected or what new industries are going to come out. So there's obviously a huge amount of new industries that are going to come out and move into those roles. So I think that's probably, from a preparation perspective, and just generally stay up to date where it's going. There's always, with any new technology, there's risk, but also there's huge upside as well. So, we're going to see the benefits as much as the change is there.
Yeah, look, I agree, Matt, but I think this is the moment of fast and slow. Because yes, we see things moving. Everyone talks about how fast the industry is moving, how much development, innovation, and it can feel sort of a bit too much for people. But I think things do happen at a pace as well. I look back over my career over the last 25 years. I've seen a lot of change. There weren't mobile phones when I started working. When I was at university, we only saw mobile phones arriving, the big block things where we carried separate batteries. People remember those things? Clip them onto our belts. And then we went into the age of sort of computers on desks and so on and so forth. And things happen fast, but they still happen at a pace because, and fundamentally, you want to take people with you. Technology will only succeed if it takes society with it, if society feels comfortable, if it feels like it can trust what's going on, and therefore adopts. Otherwise, a good idea, a good piece of tech, a good software will still be a good piece of software, but it just won't get taken on board. So adoption, I think a sense of let's not be too scared. I think there's a real world where we can be talking ourselves into being scared of these things and fear and headlines about all the bad stuff. There's so much brilliant opportunity that will come from this and benefit humanity. And then also a sense of, look, it's also where our kids will be going. We heard, things earlier. The last 20 years, we've seen such change. The next 20 years, you couldn't possibly predict. If someone told me 20 years ago, predict where we are now, there's no way I'd have got it right. So where will we be in the next 20 years? I think it's a fool's game to predict, but the step along the way will happen, I hope, where society accepts those things because it sees it works for them. And that way we get the best outcomes, and hopefully we all feel comfortable and happy about where we're going.
I'd also add one other bit, actually, from a Web3 perspective. Obviously, we're here today. Is one of the things that's going to change is that you can, with prompts, obviously, you put in a request. You can prompt your ideas of whatever you want to happen. Whereas previously, you might have needed a web designer and you might have needed a coder. Actually, we're getting to the point where you can actually say what you want your smart contract to be, and what you want it to do. And
are you able to, for example, ask it to make investment strategies for you?
You can. That is one of the harder ones to do. But if you think from a task perspective, let's say you wanted to buy a DeFi application and you wanted to build that. Coding is now getting very good. We're not 100% there, nowhere near yet, but it is getting very good. And you can actually just prompt a smart contract that you want it to be. So you can say, I want it to do this, and then it will interact with other smart contracts that are other agents, and they'll all work with each other. So I think it just means people can be much more innovative, more cost effectively, more quicker, and definitely from an R&D perspective, you can test and try things much faster.
You can do a lot more things than just writing your speeches and doing your homework. Yeah. Darren, how are we doing on time? Do we have time for one or two?
If only there was an AI prompt to tell you that.
Right. Are you happy to take some questions from the audience? Yes, let's do some questions. Any questions? Gentleman in the back. Yes.
I think everyone here really needs to be in fear of AI now. What Matt said in the first 15 minutes has made more sense than anyone actually acknowledges here. Politicians don't have a clue. Boris Johnson absolutely didn't know what he was doing. Matt, what you said about energy, this government is lost. You have to consider basic principles, and you need people like Kudos, British companies, that actually properly navigates through this mess. AI will be a disaster for the UK unless people like Matt and British companies do what they need to do. Take it away from the governments. Take it away. Would you put a nuclear plant in the middle of the UK? You are putting data centers from American companies that are going to be nuclear bombs, and you don't have a clue. AWS is controlling your data. Priti Patel put us in that position. Only people like Kudos have the knowledge about energy, about how AI is going to work. And unless you put those people in charge to dictate and understand basic fundamental principles, you're finished. And you are already a third world country, and you will be.
To that question. Was that a question? I'm really sorry. We're going to have to wrap you up there, I'm afraid.
Well, look, just I want to say, very strong points there from the gentleman at the back. But look, it's a combination. You've got to have industry working with elected politicians, because some of these decisions are going to impact society. And I think that's the balance, which, sometimes gets wrong and sometimes gets right. But personally, someone who's come from industry, I see the more, and I said this in my maiden speech in the House of Lords last year, which was Parliament, if it wants to stay relevant, if it wants to make the right decisions about legislation and policy, has to work closer with businesses, closer to understand what they're trying to achieve to get the best outcome. So in a way, not entirely, sir, but I do agree with some of what you're saying.
Great, thank you. Dumpling, Matt, Colvia, thank you very much.
Thank you.